All right, we're off and running. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to continue on with our look at excuse me, chapter 2, where to start. But what we're going to be focusing on today are two very important aspects of this course. Number one, we're going to now begin with the actual knowledge about writing the research report that we were looking at. We're going to get you started on the basics of that. And then also we're going to focus in on critical thinking today. We've already done some of the tools of that. For example, deduction is a big part of critical thinking. But today we're going to more explicitly take a look at some of the issues and some of the importance that critical thinking has in our society. So before we get to that though, just a brief mention. We got exam number 1 coming up. It is coming up a week from today. So it's going to be in class during class time. It's going to be the only thing that we do on that particular day. And we're going to cover certain chapters and certain lectures. So the chapters that will be covered are chapters 1, chapters 2. So those are the chapters that we've been spending these last few classes on. And then also chapter 3, but just a section, being an ethical researcher, the issue of misrepresentation. And we're going to get into that when we get into citations and some of the issues about writing next class. What will not be on the exam are the readings from technical writing. So the readings from technical writing are intended more as a reference guide. So I want you to be aware of them. I want you to know about plagiarism and citation, but how to cite, formats, those kind of things, they will not be on the exam. You'll be tested on those via your research paper to see if you've achieved those learning objectives. So none of the readings that are listed for technical writing will be tested on the exam, so you can adjust your studying for the exam accordingly. In terms of the lectures, we are not going to have anything from the first week of lectures, because if you recall, the first day was your welcome to the course, this is what the course is all about, and the second day was the in-class experiment. So none of those will be on the exam. You won't have to know anything about the in-class experiment, for example, for the exam. But we will start with week 2, which was our look at chapter 1. We began chapter 2. We have this lecture today. And then Thursday's class, when we take a look at the Appendix A, reporting research, and just some more issues about writing. So these are the lectures that will be covered. These are the readings that will be covered. Again, no readings from technical writing. In terms of the format for the exam, it's going to be a multiple choice exam. It's going to follow the same format that I've used in my other classes. So if you're familiar with my other classes, you'll know this. If not, this will be new. But the way that it works is that we got section number 1. That covers materials that from the readings, information from the readings that was not covered in class. So unfortunately, this is just one semester. You're reading about a lot of things for experimental psychology in the textbook, but not all of that can be covered in class. I choose the most important stuff, sometimes the more challenging stuff to go over in class, but we still want to make sure that we assess our knowledge of what we're learning. So section 1 will cover materials from the readings that we don't get to cover in class. Section number 2 will cover material from the readings that we do get to look at in class, plus any sort of extra things that we might do in the lectures. Because of this, because the more important information is the stuff that we do in class, that's going to be reflected in your score on the exam. 1/3 of your score is going to be coming from section number 1. 2/3 of your score is coming from section number 2. And it'll also be reflected in the types of questions that you'll be asked. So for example, section number 1 will have recognition type only questions. So you won't have application questions. You won't have questions where you have to go kind of deeper in terms of the analysis of the concepts. Really what I'm testing here is, are you aware of the material, not whether you have a deep understanding of it. So it'll be like definitional questions, recognition type stuff. Section 2, however, can include those questions. So you might see some definitional recognition type questions, but they will also have applied questions that test your knowledge in a deeper manner. So for example, if we did not cover deduction in class, question number 1 might say something like, reasoning by deduction is going from A, data to a general theory, or B, a general theory to, a piece of data. That's recognition. It's general theory going to a piece of data. That would be a type of recognition type question. In section 2, on the other hand, you might get a question such as, Jim saw one white swan, then he saw another white swan, and then he saw 20 more white swans. From this data, Jim proposed a theory that all swans are white. Jim was engaging in induction, deduction, and the answer there would be induction. So not a definitional question, requires you to know about induction and then be able to apply it. That's what you'll see in section 2. That's the only thing we're going to be doing on that day, and we'll be doing it in class. Any questions about the exam before we go on to today's class? All right. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to start our look at writing. So if we're going to be writing a 14 to 17 page research paper as our main project for this course. And if I just asked you to write that now, I'm sure this would probably be most of you at your laptop, just not knowing what to do, not knowing where to start. So we're going to make sure that you don't have this experience. We're going to introduce skills and techniques and give you the knowledge that you need, not to quite get you to this experience. I'm not going to lie to you. Most people do not enjoy writing. I do this for my profession, and writing is really the least enjoyable part of what I do. So I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, you're going to love it by the time we're out of here. So you're not going to get there, but we'll definitely get to this point. We'll get to the point where you're not going to enjoy writing. Perhaps some of you might. I speak from personal experience myself, but you're going to get to the point where if you have to write a paper, you can say to yourself, all right, I got to write 17 pages. I know when to start, where to start. I know what to do. I know what I need. I'm just going to sit down and write it. So we're going to take you from here and get you to here. And it's all going to start with what we're going to go over today. And then also we're going to take a look at critical thinking. This course satisfies the critical thinking requirement for general education. And we're going to find out why this is a good need. And it partly has to do with the fact that the education system, as George Carlin here says, does suck in certain regards. And we're going to see why and why critical thinking is so very important. All right, so where to start? What are we going to do? We're going to start with content versus APA style. So in the research paper that you'll be writing, you will receive a grade for the content and you'll receive a grade for the APA style. So we'll go over what those are. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a research article. What are the major parts of the research paper that you will be writing? Then we're going to take a look at critical thinking. We're going to go over the checklist for the critical reader and also discuss why is it that critical thinking is so necessary to practice, especially in this day and age. All right, so content versus APA style. So those are two aspects of a research paper, and the content is what your research paper is about. It's the information that you're communicating in your research paper. The APA style is how your research report is presented. So the American Psychological Association, APA, they came up with their own style for how they want reports to look. And it is widely used in all psychology reports. It's also been adopted outside of psychology as well. It's one of the major styles that you'll encounter in many different disciplines. So it's a good style to know how to do just in general, but that's what it is. It's just a style. It's just how is your research report presented. So the content is the information that your research report contains. The APA style is just the format that your research report takes. What font do you use? How big is the font? How wide are your margins? That's all part of APA style. So we'll take a look at the difference between the two. So this is a sentence from one of my publications. And this was a publication about perspective used in paintings. And here's one of the sentences. It goes, it is less widely appreciated that when perspective effects become extreme, vision does become wildly distorted. And then I cite Kennedy and Yudicevich 2002, and then Kubavi 1986. These are two published pieces of research as evidence for my claim. So that's a citation, and there's the format of the citation. So the content of this is basically saying that it's not very well known, it's less widely appreciated, that when perspective effects become extreme, when you go off into the periphery of a picture, vision becomes wildly distorted. Things actually start looking weird in the margins or in the edges of pictures if they're drawn in perfect perspective. That's the content. This is the APA style. So when it was published in Times New Roman. That is APA style. That's the required font. And then you can see here that these citations are done in a certain way. So it's Kennedy and Yudicevich and then Kubavi because they're in order according to the first author. We do last names, not first names, no first names included, no first initials. The year that it was published, not the page number, and it's in parentheses here. That's a parenthetical citation. You'll learn more about that. But basically, there are rules that said this should look the way that it looks. That's APA style. I could have written the same content in a different way. I could have written, it is less widely appreciated that when perspective effects become extreme, vision does become wildly distorted. These distortions were mentioned by Kennedy and Yudicevich in 2002, as well as by Kubavi in 1986. That's the same exact content, wrong style, that is not APA style. That's APA style, so in a in-text citation here, we use and instead of ampersand. We use the year and we put it in parentheses, and that is proper APA style. So all of these things that we're going to do in APA, they're going to be introduced little bit by little bit. So I'm not going to expect you to write everything in APA, perfect APA style right from the get-go. So if you can't remember all these rules about citations, don't worry, we're going to get there. It's just for illustration purposes for today's class. I could have written, it is less widely appreciated that when perspective effects become extreme, vision does become wildly distorted. There were some researchers that did notice this, like Kennedy and Yudicevich in 2002 and Kubavi in 1986. Same content, not APA style. There we have it in APA style. And then just one more time, I could have written, not a lot of people know this, but when perspective effects become extreme, things start to look really weird. This was shown in research done by Kennedy and Yudicevich in 2002 and Kubavi in 1986. So a different way of saying the exact same content and then done in proper APA style. And once again, doing an in-text citation where you use the ampersand rather than and. So one of the things I'll just mention real quick, as we go through APA style is just an agreed upon way of presenting your research reports. And it has some rules where I look at them and I say, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because it makes your report easier to navigate. It makes it easier for somebody to understand what's going on, to find the information that they're looking for. Other rules, sometimes I look at them and I go with a why. Why are we doing that? Why is that a rule? One of those is the ampersand versus the and. So if it's in the text, you write and. If it's in parentheses, you write ampersand. Why? I don't know. Is there a good reason? Probably not. But that's just one of the things that APA style, it's a convention, and we need to learn the convention. We need to learn to be able to communicate in that manner so that we can effectively communicate. And you'll find some of the rules make sense, like alphabetizing your references, some of them, or citations. Some of them don't make sense, like ampersand, but it's part of the style that we are agreeing to do. All right, so that's content versus style. Let's now take a quick look at the anatomy of a research article, and basically we'll look at the pieces of the research article. And each of these pieces you will write for your final report. So you're going to write an abstract, you're going to write the main body of your report, which is the introduction, method, results, and discussion. And we are going to write these piece by piece by piece. So during the course of this semester, you're never going to be writing more than maybe 4 pages at a time. Sometimes you'll be writing 2.5 pages. So for example, the methods is going to be approximately 2.5 pages. The results is going to be approximately 2.5 pages. So we're going to do this really bit by bit to kind of spread the writing out over a longer period of time. It won't seem that daunting when we break it up in that manner. So for the anatomy of a research article, this is the article where I took that sentence from. Looking at perspective pictures from too far, too close, and just right. So I'll break down each little section, and then you can see kind of like where it is in this actual paper that was published. So let's start with the abstract. The first thing that people often read after the title for a research paper is the abstract. And what the abstract is, it's a summary of the research report. And it's a complete summary of a research report. I oftentimes like to use metaphors for research reports that kind of tie them into what they really are, which is a story that you're telling your researcher about scientific truth, but in fact it is a story. And if you think of your research report as a movie, the abstract is a trailer that ruins the ending. So if you've ever seen one of those trailers where you watch it and you're like, well, I guess I don't have to watch the movie anymore because everything was in the trailer, that's exactly what it is. It's a very short little synopsis, but it contains everything. It contains a synopsis of the intro, it contains a synopsis of the methods, a synopsis of the results, and a synopsis of your discussion all in one place. It basically gives the reader a summary of everything that they're about to read. Much less detail necessarily, but still a picture of what is going to happen in the entire article. The first main section that we come to is the introduction. And in the introduction, what you're going to be doing is, this is what outlines the problem that is going to be investigated. This is what communicates to your reader what is the question that you're going to be looking at, what is the purpose of this paper. Why does this paper exist? What is it trying to answer? What information is it going to try to provide? So it outlines the problem that's being investigated. It mentions past research and theories that are relevant to the problem, and it describes those in detail. This is very important. This gives the reader the context that they need in order to understand everything that is going to happen later on in the story. So this is almost like tapping somebody into the either the genre of a movie, or making sure that they've at least heard about the previous the prequels to the particular movie. So if you have no idea what's going on in the movie, let's say that you just walk into a theater and you don't even know what movie you're watching, and on the screen all of a sudden flashes the words, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Well, then when you start seeing spaceships and lasers, you're not going to be surprised, because you understand that this is a sci-fi movie. It happens in a galaxy far away. So you're ready for it. Your mind is prepared. Same thing with past research and theories relevant to the problem. You're going to make sure that you explain to the reader, this is what you need to know in order to understand what's coming next. So if somebody, if you're walking into The Rise of Skywalker, right? We'll keep with the Star Wars example. If you're taking a friend to go see The Rise of Skywalker, and you ask them, what do you think of the first 2 movies? And they're like, oh, I've never seen it. Well, then you better give them an introduction, and you better say, all right, well, there's this character, Rey, and nobody knows anything about her, and then they did all this kind of stuff, and all this other things happened. You need to give them the background theories so they can understand what's coming up and what's going on next. And then your introduction ends with a formal hypothesis. It ends with a deduction that says, if these theories are true, and we put subjects into the experimental situation that we're going to put them in, then we should find this behavior. We should find this result. So it ends with that formal statement that says, if this is true, and we do what we're about to do, we should find this result, this behavior. And that is that logical format, and it's connecting your past research and your theory to your current research problem and your current expected results, your prediction. And you need to draw that line. This is part of the reason why deduction is so important, because saying if this is true and we do this particular experiment, we should find this is reasoning from theories to a prediction. That's deduction. That's your final step in your introduction. So the introduction is the first thing that they read. Typically, the introduction is either going to be the second last thing you write, or it's going to be the last thing you write. So different people differ on when they write the introduction, but they definitely don't write it first. And typically what you write first, and what we're going to write first, is what comes after the introduction, which is the method section. So the method section, that's the second major part of the research paper. This is where you detail the methods of your research, you detail the methods of your experiment, and this is where you give the reader enough information so they know exactly how the study was conducted, and also enough information where if they wanted to, they could replicate the study. So the best analogy for the method section is it's a recipe from a cookbook. And the same way that the recipe in a cookbook says, here's the ingredients that you need, and here's how you combine them all so you can bake this cake. The method section is going to say, here's the ingredients that you need. We have these subjects, we have these apparatuses and stimuli, and here's how you combine it. Here's the procedure we go through in order to produce the experiment that we did. So the sections in this are going to be a section on subjects. So as we go through this, writing this, any information that you are not aware of or could not be aware of, I will provide to you. So for example, the number of subjects, the characteristics of those subjects, I will give you that information. Materials or apparatus, you have access now to the lists of words. You know the materials that were used because you participated in it, so it was a pencil and paper handout. Images were projected on a screen. I will give you the details about how many seconds, how many, time for recall and all that. But these are basically the ingredients that we used. And then you have the procedure, a step-by-step description of how they did, how we did this experiment. So for example, we showed one list at a time. At the end of the list, people received 2 minutes to write down as many words as they could in any order, not in a particular order, but in any order. During that time, they also had to rate confidence scales, confidence for each word on a scale of 1 to 4. Not 1 to 10, not 1 to 20, we used 1 to 4. So you want to give enough details so that somebody reading our experiment, if they said, you know what, I want to redo that experiment, they would know how to redo it. They would have enough information to replicate that experiment. All right, so this is typically the first section that we write. It's going to be the first section that you write as well, because outside of some of the details that I will be providing for you very shortly, we already know enough to write the method section. You know enough about what was done, you know enough about the apparatus, I'll give you the details on some of the things that you don't, and you know enough about the subjects to write up the method section. So this is going to be the first section we do, and it's going to be about 2.5 pages long. After that, the next section we write is going to be the results section. And the results section is where you finally present the findings of your research. And by findings, we mean exactly that. What did you find, but not what does it mean? So the results are what did you find. The discussion section is what does it all mean. So make sure that you keep that very separate. We present the findings of our research without interpretation, without telling the reader what it all means. So the 3 ways that we're going to present these, we're going to present a description in narrative form. We are then going to present statistical language to back up our descriptions. And then we're also going to use tables and graphs to make it easy to follow. So you can see here I have a graph here that illustrates the stimuli that I was using, and there was another graph that illustrated the results as well. That makes it easy to understand. The best analogy I can think of for the results section is it is very difficult to understand. It's typically the most challenging section whenever you're reading a research report. So even today, it's the one I have to go through the slowest because it is the most challenging one to understand. So because of that, we're going to use techniques that have been developed to help people who have a hard time understanding stories to understand stories. And the biggest population of individuals who have trouble understanding stories are little children. So there's a reason little children's books use repetition, because it's easy to understand. Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? Papa Bear's porridge was too hot. Mama Bear's porridge was too cold. Baby Bear's porridge was just right. We're going to use those descriptions and statistical language, and we're going to repeat it in a very repetitive structure to help our minds understand it better. And much like a children's book, we're going to use pictures. We're going to use as many pictures as we can to basically say, well, this group scored higher than this group, and if you're having trouble understanding it, here's a nice little picture, a nice little graph to help you, much like a children's book would, where it says Goldilocks entered the cabin, and you show Goldilocks entering a cabin to help them make sense of what's going on. So that's what I want you to think of when we're writing the results section. We're going to use that. We're going to use repetition. We're going to use pictures to make it as easy as possible to understand. All right, and then final section is the discussion section. This is the one we're going to write third. So we're going to write the methods, then we're going to write the results, then we're going to write the discussion, then we're going to circle back and we're going to write the introduction. So we're going to write this, and different people differ on, do they write the introduction first and then the discussion section? I like writing the discussion section. It's almost like your research report is a mystery novel, and you want to figure out which theory is the murderer, right? Which theory done it? Is it this theory that's correct, or is it this theory that's correct? And like most good murder mystery novels, the author works out the ending first and then writes the beginning to make it, as understandable a story as possible. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to work out the ending first. And now the discussion section is where you present the conclusions of your research. Results is where you present what you found. Discussion is where you present what it all means. So you present the conclusions of your research. You mention whether your results supported the hypothesis you came up with in the introduction or whether it didn't. And this is one reason why you want to write this first, so you know what hypothesis was supported and which one wasn't. You indicate to the reader whether your results fit with previous theories or whether they don't. So do they support the theories that came before, or do our results contradict these theories, meaning that new theories are required? So you have to say what parts of the theories are supported, what parts are not supported, which results are in line with theories, which results are not. And then you tie it in with, or you expand on it with implications of the research. So what does this mean for the body of psychology as a whole, right? What does this mean in terms of applying it to the real world? So this is where I want you to think of and try to see examples of group cognition and group memory in the real world. So once again, here would be where we would write, what does our research have to say about how the jury system should work? Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea? What weaknesses is it prone to? What does our research have to say about how study groups work? Are they a problem in an area like psychology where there's a lot of sort of myths that abound in psychology? So if you ever wonder, how did people ever get the idea that we only use 10% of our brains? Maybe it's this kind of idea of group memory. So we're going to look at, this is where you point the implications of your research. What does it all mean? For this class, we're going to focus on real-world applications. It's a little bit easier than theoretical implications, but you can do both, but we're going to focus on practical implications. And then the last thing you want to do is you want future research directions. You want to let the reader know what is the next step, and you want to let them know why you want to take that next step. So for us, the number of next steps are infinite, right? Research is never going to be done. Nobody's ever going to run an experiment and say, oh, that's it, I'm done psychology. We can move on to something else. No, there's always the next step. There's always that next future research direction. And you need reasons. You need to basically tell them, oh, I want to look at this. I want to look at autistic children because that will test whether or not this group memory effect is due to social interaction versus other forces. I want to take a look at pictures because that will let us know whether this group memory effect has anything to do with verbal communication, or is it just a kind of more general conceptual type of communication. You need the reasons to do it. And this is basically, science has been doing this all along, but the best analogy I can come up with future research directions is this is that end credit scene that sets up the sequel. And it basically gets your reader excited for, oh wow, I can't wait to see this next piece of research. So the MCU kind of introduced that to kind of the mainstream audience. Science has been doing it all along, so we're going to keep going with it because it just kind of works. It kind of gets into the reader's mind and says, you know what, they keep thinking about it and they keep saying, that's an interesting thing, I want to see how it all works out. All right, so that's the discussion section. Any questions about this is just like a general overview. Once we get to writing each section, I'll go into more depth in terms of what is expected and also tips on how to write each of these sections. But this was just an intro, general overview of everything. Any questions on this or comments, stuff you want to know? Makes sense so far? Doesn't seem too scary? Good. All right, because it's not. Okay. So we're going to go through now a checklist for the critical reader. So I'm going to have more details about this, but we're going to have a library visit. It's coming up soon. It's on your syllabus. And during that library visit, we're going to learn how to search these psychology databases to find that background research that we're going to use to write our research report. So that's the idea of the library assignment. That's the purpose of it. Before we even get to that, though, I want to share this checklist for the critical reader because this is going to kind of prepare you for reading these scientific journal articles. So it's it's not beneficial to read these passively. You always want to kind of engage with them actively, and this checklist is a nice way of learning how to engage with these articles. It's also a very helpful checklist for when you're writing. So when you're writing, you should go through this checklist, and if your writing is clear enough and it presents enough information, it will allow your readers to answer all of the questions on this checklist. So one of the things about writing a research report is that the length of your research report, it has to be as long as it needs to be. So some research reports are 4 pages long because that's as long as they need to be. Some research reports are 30 pages long, right? This is in the real world. Yours is going to be like 14 to 17 pages. But some of them are incredibly long because they need to be in order to tell their story. This is going to be a nice guide to let you know how long does your paper need to be. Because if your paper is long enough that a naive reader, somebody coming to it for the first time, can answer all of the questions on the checklist that we're going to take a look at in just a moment, that means your paper is long enough. If it's missing information, that means your paper is not long enough. So it's a nice little way to answer this open-ended question of how long should a research paper be. So this is our look at critical thinking. So before we dive into the checklist, we're going to spend a little bit of time taking a look at why critical thinking is so important, why we need to develop this skill, and why for some of you it might be more of a challenge because unfortunately in our school system, oftentimes critical thinking is not practiced enough, especially in the elementary and high school system. So this might be very new to many of you, so let's just dive into it. The need for critical thinking and the ability to judge information, the ability to make deductions, the ability to come to your own conclusions and then compare them to the conclusions that others have done. It's becoming more and more important because of the age that we live in. So one of the big reasons why we need critical thinking like now these days is because of the rise of fake news, it's because of the rise of pseudoscience, it's because of the rise of all this information that is being made available now. And the old model of simply being able to say, well, it appeared in the New York Times, so it's got to be true, that model is gone. That model no longer works. We now need to be able to say, well, let me actively, critically think about what I'm reading and think about, does this make sense? Does it fit with what I already know? If not, where are the disagreements? What does this deductively lead me to conclude about other things? You need to be able to do that kind of analysis these days, because that sort of authority, ability to rely on authority, is becoming ever less reliable. So you might think to yourself, well, I've been critical thinking for a while, but you might not be. Critical thinking is something that is not necessarily promoted in our society. So George Carlin had this great bit where he observed about why the education system sucks, right? And I understand that it's a little bit weird for me to be telling you about this, considering I'm part of that system. But part of it definitely does suck. And he goes, there's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks. He goes, because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now, the big owners, the wealthy, the real owners. So this was back in, I think like the 90s he made this observation. And the gap between the wealthy and the not wealthy has only gotten bigger since that time. So he's talking about the real owners now, the big owners, the wealthy, the real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want, and we're going to see what they don't want. They don't want this video to play. That's what they don't want. Oh, you can't stop the truth. All right.
Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking.
Sorry. I don't know what happened. It doesn't work as well if you can't see them. Are we back? No. You know, if I was prone to conspiracy theories, this would be a perfect time to bring one up, but I'm not. All right, here we go.
Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table to figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years.
Whoops, forgot about the F-bombs. Okay, so anyways, he makes the argument that the big interests, the big corporations, they don't want critical thinking population because they don't want a population that's going to ask questions. It's going to take a look at their situation and say, does this situation really make sense? Should we really be in this particular situation? Or is there a better way? Now, I'm going to play you an excerpt from, just in case you think it's just George Carlin that's thinking about this, I'm going to play you an excerpt from Leap First. This is by Seth Godin. So I'm just going to have to pull this up real quick. But he also talks about the school system and how the school system was developed, and more importantly, why the school system was developed. So let me bring back the image there for you. And I will just pop this in. All right, so we're starting at 1850.
Which leads me to my story about the elk.
All right, so let me cue it up to where we're supposed to be. Okay, so I'm going to try to crank the volume on this. Can everybody hear? Is it, because it's playing through my laptop rather than playing through the, let me see. Hopefully this will work. And hopefully it won't be too loud. Or it won't work at all. One moment. All right, well, that's not going to work. Once again, I'm not prone to conspiracy theories, but I'm starting to get convinced. Okay, so he's first going to tell a story about a day that he visited his son's elementary school. All right, so I'll set it up that way. So let's listen to what he has to say about this visit to the elementary school.
The time when my kids were growing up, and I remember being invited to the 5th grade classroom with an invitation to bring 23 hammers with me. And the teacher was teaching something that was vaguely related to math. And the idea was that if you took a board and put little brads in it, little tiny nails, in a circle or a shape, and then took string, went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, you could make beautiful pictures. But you'd also learn this idea of modulo 9 and remainders, etc. So she said, you bring the hammers, we'll run this class. So I come in, and I don't know if you've ever heard 23 hammers held by 23 10-year-olds hammering as hard as they can over and over again. It is not something that I want to repeat soon. What was fascinating about what happened was this. The teacher said to the students at the beginning, listen carefully, what I want you to do is hammer in each brad halfway so it's nice and tight. And you can go ahead and make a pattern. So there's hammering, 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 hammering. And after about 8 minutes, the teacher walks over to one of the kids and takes his board, makes the class stop. She holds it up and she says, look at this. And she wiggles and pulls the nail out. And she said, I told you to put them all the way in. And one by one, she took every single one of these kids' nails out of the board and dropped them on the floor, teaching him a lesson he will never forget. And the lesson was, this is a class about doing what the teacher told you. Now, there is no shortage of people who know how to hammer in brads. Teaching kids how to do that is not really a productive use of an hour of their time. But the old model was that competence is important. If you're going to be competent, you must learn to follow instructions. And so the lesson she needed to teach, she thought, was you ought to do exactly what I say. This is defective. I'm going to process you again. That's industrialism. So let's talk about competence. In
All
the
right.
industry you want to go in.
So, talks about competence, talks about the fact that the old model, and he mentions this a lot, the old model, it's outdated now. The old model was about teaching competence. The old model was about teaching, follow the instructions, do it right, and then let's do it again. So you might ask yourself, well, why? Why is this the way that schools are? And it goes back to George Carlin's observation about who is in charge and who is who kind of designed these schools. So he goes on, Seth Godin goes on to talk about how schools were developed, how public schools were developed, and we're going to pick it up here with that particular discussion.
To create, and what it meant was no map. There was no step-by-step instructions. So where did our need for a map come from? Well, I think it came from Massachusetts in the 1800s. Horace Mann, the father of public school, invented something called the common school. And the purpose of the common school was that the common people could go and learn to become educated, right? Go and become educated. Why? Because we needed to train kids to work in a factory. We needed to train kids to do what they were told. We needed to train kids to sit still for hours every day and hear the instructions and then say it back to us. Culturally, economically, we needed factory workers. That's why it was supported by all the people who paid for it. Amazingly, I'm not making this up.
All right. So culturally, at that time, when public school was developed, what we needed factory workers. And the public school system was developed in a way to make sure that we had graduates of that system who could be factory workers. So who could do something that had a right answer and do it over and over again, follow the instructions, and do it correctly. What they were not taught was critical thinking. And I can see remnants of that. I mean, there's still remnants of that in the school system. Oftentimes, a lot of remnants of that on the school system. And you know that you've been a victim of this sort of indoctrination if certain things occur. So if you have ever been in a class and you've asked a teacher, is this going to be on the exam? What you are basically saying is, am I supposed to learn this and give it back to you? Because that's what I've been taught is what is the way to success. So if you say, is this going to be on the exam? Basically what you're saying is, I want to learn how to do factory work. Please tell me, is this the correct way to do that? If, for example, you're ever in a situation that's open-ended, where there isn't necessarily a correct answer, and you find yourself very, very uncomfortable, it's because you've been, again, indoctrinated in this previous model, in this previous way of thinking. So when we were doing the induction experiment in this class, when we were doing that induction in class demonstration, some of you were completely fine. Is it this one? No? All right, let me try this one. Is it this one? No? All right, let me try another one. Others of you seem to feel very uncomfortable. You were very much like, I don't like this. It's like, I don't know what to do. Like, which way? What's the next step? What's the next step? Basically, what is the right answer? And again, that's the road to the factory worker, not the road to the scientist. So if you ever have some time, I highly recommend check out Leap First. It's available at the libraries. You can download it as an audiobook. And it basically gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here as scientists, which is create and uncover the knowledge of psychology. So in a lot of what we do, there is no right answer. In a lot of what we do, there is no roadmap to say, go and do this. So we need to get comfortable with abandoning a lot of the things that we've learned, and we need to get comfortable with new skills, such as critical thinking. So I know that this kind of runs counter to one of the big things that we're going to learn in this course, which is APA style. And APA style is literally saying, this is how you need to do it. I want you to do it this way. But everything else that we're going to be doing here is going to be way more open-ended. And as part of that, and as part of your growing knowledge base and skill base, we need to develop this ability to engage in critical thinking. And again, it's something that you might not have been taught a lot of, because again, it's not something that a factory worker needs to know. It's something that a scientist needs to know. It's not something that a lot of the public school system was made to produce. It's something that you might be being exposed to for the first time ever. So let's continue on with a look at why this is so important these days as well. So one of the resources that I love, I use it all the time. I always say it's a great place to start, but it's a horrible place to end, is Wikipedia. I don't know how many times when I was being introduced to a new idea, my first stop is Google, my second stop is Wikipedia, and I'll end up at an article, and that's where I start my look into this information. Well, Wikipedia, you cannot just take information at face value on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is notorious for being unreliable. You have to apply critical thinking. So sometimes, I don't know, this might be very boring, that might deserve a little critical thinking there, but you can't just take it at face value. So Brian B. Newcomb, this little piece of trivia here I like, he goes, he was noted for refusing to use a comb unless it was purchased that day due to his name. So you can't just take that as face value the way that you might have been able to previously when there was a lot more kind of vettedness and a lot, and just the world was different. So I don't think Jeremy Renner is a velociraptor. I think he is a musician though. I'm not so sure if Emma Stone did fall out of the sky as an angel. That one might be true as well. But again, these are all examples from Wikipedia that made it out into the world. So Spot the Dog is probably not a book series written by Ernest Hemingway under the pseudonym Eric Hill. And it probably doesn't center around the character Spot, a young golden retriever who struggles with alcoholism and a shattered sense of masculinity. Spot the Dog showcases Hemingway's hallmark minimalism. Where is Spot? Is he under the stairs? Is he in the box? No, he's at a bar, sipping whiskey, sucking on cigarettes, suffering. That's the kind of thing where when you read it, you just can't accept it. You have to say to yourself, this seems odd. This does not fit with what I currently know about children's books. This does not fit with what I currently know about, my society. Maybe my next step would be to take a look at Spot the Dog and see if this is true or not. So these are all skills that we have to develop because, these examples here, pretty obvious, pretty, chosen to be obvious. Other ones, not so much. So I found this article in Wikipedia. It was about the Reich Corps of the Trombone. And this was about an organization of trombonists that was sponsored by the Nazi Party during its rise to power through the end of World War II. And it's all about their history and how they were just such powerful performers that they were used at all these rallies and all these events, and they were instrumental in kind of the wave of Nazism that swept through Germany at that time and changed. And look at it; it looks 100% legit. I mean, it has origin, history, selected bibliography. It's false. It's a hoax. It's made up. It's completely made up. So we cannot rely on the look of things. We cannot rely on where information comes from anymore. We have to start really asking ourselves the types of questions that you're going to see on the checklist about what is going on here. What do I think? Does it fit? What does it mean? Does it all make sense before we take it all in? And just to give you some more examples, even when it's the truth, it turns out it's not always the real truth. So this was a very interesting interaction between a Swedish professor, TED speaker, Hans Rosling, and he was challenging the news media. He was being interviewed, and he was talking to an interviewer, and he was telling them that you cannot trust news outlets if you really want to understand the world. So we're going to take a look at what he means by that and just kind of see why, again, we need to develop these critical thinking tools.
Men man kan inte använda sig av media om man ska förstå världen. Man måste ha en grundläggande skolutbildning. Och sen måste man följa upp de här grundläggande fakta. Om man tror att större delen av världens befolkning är jättefattiga, flickorna går inte i skolan, barnen vaccineras inte och här är de rika länderna och så försöker de komma dit som flyktingar. Då vet man ju inte hur det är. Man måste förstå att det finns länder på alla nivåer och de flesta är någonstans i mitten. De går i skolan, de är vaccinerade, de har tvåbarnsfamiljer. Du pratar om befolkningstillväxt. Antal barn på jorden har slutat öka. Antalet barn på jorden har slutat öka därför att de allra flesta använder preventivmedel. Och det visste inte Danmarks journalister när jag frågade dem idag.
Men det jag tänker på, sett från ett medieperspektiv, inte bara här i programmet, men medier generellt, det är ju att många medier vill säga vi rapporterar om världens tillstånd som den är, och lige nu är det krig, konflikter, kaos, oro, och en hel räcka andra negativa aspekter.
Det var ju fel. Du har ju fel, rakt upp och ner fel. Det var ett fantastiskt val i Nigeria. Demokratiskt val i Afrikas största nation. Där en halvduglig regering ersattes av en mycket kompetent chef nu, Mohammed den nya, som får stöd från hela befolkningen. Det fantastiska valet som var i Indonesien förra året. De framsteg som är i Indien. Igår så förklarade vi att Indien nu är fritt från städkrav.
Men Nigeria är fanget i en djup terrorkrig mot Boko Haram.
Ja, en liten del av Nigeria, inte resten. Nigeria har en snabb ekonomisk tillväxt och fallande barnadödlighet. Om ni väljer att visa om ni väljer att för mig att bara visa min sko, den är ju jätteful, det är ju bara en del av mig. Om du väljer att visa mitt ansikte så är det en annan. Ni visar ju en liten del och kallar det för världen. Den stora skillnaden, att flickorna går i skolan, att barnen vaccineras, att de flesta har elektricitet hemma, att människor är kapabla och är yrkesfolk runt omkring i världen. Det är viktigt att visa, men det händer så sakta så det kommer inte med nyhet.
Vad baserar du den viden på?
Jag använder vanlig statistik som är sammanställd av Världsbanken och FN, och det är inte kontroversiellt. Det här är ingenting som man kan diskutera. Jag har rätt och du har fel.
Yeah.
There you go. So it's very true. They've actually done studies on what makes people read an article online, what makes people click on an article online. And does anybody know the one emotion that is the most likely to get somebody to click a headline to read the entire article? Any ideas? Yeah.
Like shock or something that you don't agree with.
It's close to shock. It's outrage. People click on outrage. They don't click on, the good stories about the good elections or, India being free of tetanus. They click on outrage. And take a look at the news media. Take a look at any of your, kind of news feeds, and just take a look at how many of them are geared towards causing outrage. And if you're going to cause outrage because that's what gets clicks, you're not going to report on the true picture of the world. You're going to report on a lot of the ugliness. So always, think about that. Think about, is this the actual truth of what's going on out there, or is it just being reported because it fits the current narrative? And that's why studies are very, very important to understand the real truth. So if you recall, a couple of classes ago, we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement and how every single news report was always about a African American, usually male, being killed by a white police officer. And that made people think it's got to be a racism issue. It's got to be racist police officers that are causing this. And somebody did a study and said, no, that's not the case at all. It's the meso and macro societal policies that are causing this disproportionate number of minorities being murdered. And again, we need to stop that. It's an issue. It needs to be addressed. But if we're wasting our time looking at the wrong area because we didn't critically think about the information, that's going to be an issue. So I don't know if we'll get to the full checklist, but I really want to drive this point home, especially how important it is. This is from a few years ago. I like this one because it kind of hits home. I'm from Canada. I'm actually from Ontario, the province of Ontario. And this one made the rounds, and it went viral on Facebook and other social media sites. And it was all about Mid-Lake Ontario eliminates soccer ball from youth soccer programs. So it goes, troubled by what they see as the overemphasis on winning in sports involving kids even under the age of 10. Youth soccer groups in Canada are doing something about it. In at least one community, Mid-Lake Ontario, kids play in leagues where they no longer keep score or even play the game with the ball. This year, to address some of the negative effects of competition, we've actually removed the ball, says Helen Dabney Coyle of Mid-Lake Soccer Association, and the kids are loving it. So it's this entire article about how they're, now they get to try new things in game settings without fear of failure. And this ball-less soccer is a challenge from a coaching perspective. I have to do a lot of imagining. And then in the background, you can hear the coach, Schultz, is heard asking his team, okay, now who wants to pretend to have the ball? When I say that Michael has kicked the ball downfield, we all have to imagine that it's down there. So this went viral, and people, again, were outraged. People were like, this is horrible for these children. They're not learning any of these skills. This is what's wrong with our society. And, today it's all these entitled children. Nobody can lose. Everybody has to win. Everybody is, has to do amazing. And it cites a CBC radio documentary. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Canada, the CBC is basically our only national channel, right? So here in the States, there's ABC, CBS, NBC. We got CBC, and it was usually the be-all and end-all of where you got your news, right? It was the highest quality news reporting. So apparently this is from a CBC radio documentary. All you had to do was click on this link to see that it took you to a satire radio show. This is basically like SNL, right, where they're just satirizing the news. It's if you want to see other examples, if you're on Reddit, you can go to the subreddit AP Onion, where people believe stories from the fake news place, The Onion, or the satirical news place, The Onion. So they printed this, and then they retracted it later. They go, no, the show is satire, we got punked. But in terms of what we've seen with false memories, once you get the idea out there, number one, you might have never read that. Number two, you might forget that. You might forget, and they found this as well, when people share stories that they know are fake, when people share stories and they say, oh my gosh, take a look at this news story, hashtag super fake, hashtag can you believe they print this? Even if people realize that the story is fake, they're likely later on to forget the source of where they heard the information, and they'll remember the information. So that's just true, and then then they'll believe the story. So think about everything that you know. Think about all the facts that you know, right? Who was the first president of the United States? What's the capital of California, right? What are the days of the week? Think about all those facts that you know. Can you remember when you learned them? Who told you? Where did you find out? Probably not, right? But you remember the facts. That is occurring now on a more widespread scale because of how easily information flows. So just to show you the spread of this actually got picked up, not just by opposing views, this is a Canadian site, but it also got picked up by the Washington Times. So the Washington Times reprinted this story, and then later edited note, sorry, this is a satirical news story, but again, the damage had already been done. And this will go even further when we look at scientific reporting. And one of the themes that we're going to explore in more depth when we get to the library assignment is that for anything that you're working on, for anything that's important to you, for anything that you want to make sure that you get the true information, you always, always, always have to go to the source. So the spot the dog example, that would have been easily answered by just opening up the book, Spot the Dog. This news report here could have been easily double-checked just by clicking on the link and going to the webpage and seeing, oh my gosh, this is a satirical comedy channel. So we need to do that because media outlets, secondhand reporting of scientific facts usually tend to distort and oftentimes present information that's just not true. It's just not the case. So for example, this was one that came out a few years ago, and it goes, better identification of Viking corpses reveals half of the warriors were female. So this was one that made the rounds because people, it was shocking, it was surprising. You have this idea of Viking warriors being all males, women are not involved. Turns out that half of them were women. So it got picked up on a number of different media news outlets. So this is Tor.com, this is Nature World News. More than Thor, half of Viking warriors were female. This actually is probably even more more in the moment right now that Jane Foster is going to be the new Thor in the MCU. It goes, a new study published in the Journal of Early Medieval Europe details how burial sites in late Viking kingdoms of Denmark and Eastern England included shield maidens buried with weapons and armor. So they did this with an analysis of the graves and what they were buried with, and then they did DNA analysis, and lo and behold, half of the warriors were women. And it was picked up in the Globe and Mail as well. Half of the Viking invaders may have been women, says study. And if you go to the original study, that is not at all what it says. It does not say anything about these females being warriors. And it actually took the Mary Sue, which is a feminist sci-fi comics geekdom website, to actually set the record straight, because they cared enough about it, and they said, let's take a look at the original article, and it says that study doesn't say that half of Viking warriors were women, and it actually is only dealing with settlers and not specifically warriors. So it had nothing to do with warriors. It was just talking about the settlers that came, but the news media reported it incorrectly. And again, if you read something like that, if you read anything about science, you need to go to the original research and then see what it actually says, because there are numerous examples of where what's reported is completely incorrect. Now, on the other hand, years later, a new study came out that actually did provide more evidence that there were actually female Viking warriors, and this is the study, this ain't the study right here, but it actually came out that it was a new study that actually did say that there were warriors that were found with female DNA. So again, the news media reported it incorrectly. They reported it wrong, and they do this all the time. I remember not too long ago, I just kept hearing news reports about how one glass of red wine was like working out for an hour. Like if you drink one glass of red wine, you get the same benefits as working out for an hour. And hearing that, how could you not just get completely jacked drinking 4 glasses of red wine a day and just end up super buff and super fit? Go to the original study, and there is like one hormone that increases out of the thousands of changes your body goes through. There is one hormone that increases during an hour of working out, and that same increase can be produced with 1 glass of red wine. So you really get like 1/1000th of the benefit of a workout from 1 glass of red wine. But news reports were just like, oh my gosh, it's like 1 glass of red wine is like a workout. It's not the case. So we'll take a look at one more example. So all of these examples were getting more and more sort of credible to illustrate the need for critical thinking. This last one is comes from the most credible source. So again, these are all news reports about scientific articles. You can't trust the news reports, go to the scientific articles. Turns out you also cannot trust the scientific articles. So you also have to critically think about scientific articles. And here's an example from Nicholas Guedjuin. And he did numerous studies on sociology, social psychology, and he did a study where women's hairstyles and men's behavior, a field experiment. So he had women in 3 different hairstyles, one with hair falling naturally on her shoulders, one on her back, and one in a ponytail, and the other one with their hair twisted in a bun. And he measured passerbys' helping behavior. So he found that the hairstyles of women had no effect on whether women would help them, but found that the hairstyle influenced male passerbys, where they were more readily helping the women with the loose hair and not the women with the ponytail or with the bun. So he published this. This is in the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, and it was peer-reviewed. And most people missed this because they weren't critically thinking. But 2 readers took a look at his data, specifically that data right there, and we'll zoom in on it. And they said to themselves, well, let's think critically about this data. Look at that average helping, average helping, average helping, average helping, average helping, average helping. they noticed, Nick Brown and James Heathers noticed that every single one of these averages ends in 0. Every one. The chances that you would actually collect data the way that they did out of 90 pedestrians and tally up how many of them helped, and then end up with an average of 0 for all 6 measures, there is only one chance in 714 that that would happen. They critically thought about this paper. They took a look at and asked questions about the data. They engaged with it, and they came to the conclusion that Nicholas Gwedgen, and I'm going to have to say allegedly because this is being videoed, made up this data. And it turns out that in his research, it seems to be a pattern of him just allegedly making up data, right? So again, I would love to say just find a respectable journal, like the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, and you can trust what's in there. You can't. You have to engage, and you have to critically think about what you're looking at. So that's where we're going to end today. Next time, we're going to go through this checklist, just so we can do those. But hopefully I've impressed upon you the importance of developing these skills. And if they feel new, if they feel a little weird, don't worry about that. We'll get that practice in. But it is absolutely essential for this course to develop these skills. And more importantly, even just outside in the real world that we live in today, critical thinking is absolutely essential. And other than that, we are done for today.